Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Maureen Gribble with UE Systems. Really excited to have you with us today. It's a big day for us. We've been kind of teasing at this and hinting at this for several weeks now and gave a little bit of a sneak peek about it last week at the SMRP conference. And now we officially get to share it with you all and let you know what we've been kind of hiding up our sleeves here the last little bit. So thanks for being with us, and we're really excited to introduce to you the OnTrak Smart Lube. So that is going to be our topic for today. Just a couple intro things before I toss things over to Blair and we get to what you're really here for. But as we always say on these webinars, we just always like to remind you all that whatever help you might need with whatever stage you're at with your ultrasound program, we're here to be of assistance. Our trainers are great at hopping on go-to meetings or Zooms to do software training. Our regional guys, they're available to do equipment help, whatever you might need. Even if it's just to bounce some ideas off of us on ways you could be using your equipment or upgrading or just trying to get the most out of what you've got. Just don't hesitate to reach out. We definitely want to be that support system for you. So just keep that in mind, as well as all these webinars we do and things like that. So hopefully we've got just about all the resources that you might need to really take your program to the next level. Typical housekeeping. So I am recording this. So if you have to hop off early or if you want to take a look at this again, I can make that recording available to you. We will also make available to you all throughout the session and afterwards a way for you to sign up for a personal introduction to this latest innovation from UE Systems. So we'll have that option for you as well, so you can kind of have a little bit more of a personalized feel for what this could do for you at your facility. But certainly, let's try and make this interactive. Toss questions at us. I'll be monitoring those and getting those questions to Blair as it makes sense. We'll obviously have some time at the end. And I have a feeling we'll probably not be able to get to all of them, but we'll for sure do some follow-up with those of you that we don't get to offline. So not to worry, we'll be sure we take care of you. And last but not least, so we are doing this live, and just any technical issues or audio issues we might have, just bear with us. We'll try and get those resolved as quick as we can. Or if you hear dogs barking or children screaming, just apologize in advance for that, as a lot of us are still doing this working from home and with children at home. So with that said, I am going to turn the screen over to Blair, and Blair will let you take it away.
Great, thank you so much. Let me and yeah, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time. We're really excited to be able to go through this and launch the OnTrak system. I'm just going to share my screen here and we'll get this up. Good. Maureen, can you let me know you can see my screen okay?
People said they're having audio issues, but I'm hearing you. Hopefully people have that resolved, but just type a question to me if you're having problems. Okay. But yep, your screen looks good.
Good. Yeah, well, thank you again. And I'm very fortunate to be able to walk you through this webinar on this product launch of the OnTrak Smart Start, but really it was a whole team of people that we're working tirelessly behind the scenes to get this out to market. We're pretty excited to bring this, and you may have already heard about the OnTrak system, which we brought out in May, which brought a tremendous amount of value in terms of prescriptive bearing monitoring with the ability to, using any device anywhere, go out and lubricate your bearings with precision using what we call ultrasound guided or ultrasound assisted lubrication. And this is really that next evolution of that technology. The right grease, the right time, the right amount from anywhere. So when we looked at this, and we've been promoting this for years and years, and this is not going to come to a shock, I don't think, to most people that are listening to this webinar about what causes premature bearing failure. Now, this was a study by SKF, and it gets repeated by different industries and different experts in the field. And the numbers do vary, but they don't vary by much. And what it comes down to is lubrication. Lubrication is by far the majority of the cause of premature bearing failures. But when you look at those studies and look at what in fact is the lubrication issues that is causing those issues, right? So we often think, in my mind has always thought like this, well, you're either under or over greasing, and often it's probably over greasing. But in fact, in this study, it was about 15%. Long time without renewing, so obviously you're just not getting around to replacing that grease that's in that bearing. The other two, which are very interesting, unsuitable lubrication. So often we have, anytime there's a human in the mix, we have the potential to mix greases, to use the wrong grease and put that into a bearing. Now we've addressed that with procedures and different styles of or fittings on the bearing, so we can only use a certain grease gun with a certain type to go into that, but there's still the chance. And the biggest one is lubricant contamination, right? And again, this won't come as a surprise to many people, but obviously we don't want stuff that we didn't design into that bearing, right? We want the pure lube, the pure grease or oil going into that bearing. And that lubricant contamination results in about 25% of that 80% of premature bearing failure. So we designed this OnTrak system, and I think what's happening, and as I look in the space of what's happening with what we'll call predictive maintenance, in particular condition monitoring, is we've been focused, and everyone seems to be racing to detect a failure, right? So every company is out there saying we can detect a failure quicker than anyone else, right? And I think that's great. I think that is great, right? But we'll go back to the saying, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Would you rather detect a failure, or would you try to prevent it from happening in the first place, right? So when we designed the OnTrak system, we had to really think and design the system to work in that proactive domain, right? And we were thinking about it from a bearing perspective. We know that 80% of bearing failures start there, right? So when you're designing a bearing management program, wouldn't it make sense to prevent versus detect? And that's really what we're focusing on here with the Smart Lube. So what is the OnTrak? It's a remote bearing monitoring and precision lubrication system designed to significantly reduce the amount of time and resource required for optimal bearing lubrication. From any device, anywhere, use real-time prescriptive friction. Now we're measuring ultrasound to give us that friction with the precision of single point lubricators. Now right there, you're doing one of two things. You're saying, finally, somebody did this. And as we got this out to industry and we worked with a few beta customers, they're saying, we've been asking for this for 10 years. Or even, and this is number two, this was my idea. I told you guys to do this a while ago, right? And it's true. The challenge wasn't that we didn't have a willingness to do this. We didn't want to do this. It has been on our radar for a long, long, long time. The technology didn't allow us to do this in a scalable, affordable way, but now we are here, and we're all about reducing that common cause of premature bearing failure. So we really designed this system on three legs, if you will, really holding this product up. The first, it had to be simple. So many of you, the majority, which I always love, is you guys are already using ultrasound technology. And if you ask why, or we ask you guys why are you using this technology, because it is one of the easier technologies to use and implement, right? So we wanted to take that simplicity of use that you would experience in our handhelds, our grease caddies, and be able to bring that in to the OnTrak unit as well. But not just how you use it, but how you install it, how you commission it, how you maintain it, because maintain a system that's trying to maintain your bearings is very, very important. And of course, it had to be affordable. No matter how great a technology solution, there is always a cost tipping point, and we're going to go through that in more detail. And if you've ever listened to me talk before, I am a preacher of open. No longer can systems be a silo. Well, if you want to get data out, you got to buy this connector and do this and stand on your left foot and pay me 3 times over. We can't get into that. What is happening with Industry 4.0 is we're seeing different solution providers coming together to feed data and to create a common solution to common problems. So we designed this system to be open. So let's take a look at the OnTrak Smart Lube overview. So first of all, really the heart of the operation is the OnTrak. It's a 16-channel edge analytics device. Now I'm going to go into more detail about what those 16 channels is. We combine the OnTrak unit with our ULTRA-TRAK 750 ultrasound sensors. These are what gets mounted onto the bearing that's listening to your bearing 24/7, looking for that change in friction that indicates the lubrication needs and health of that bearing. Even while you're sleeping, it's going, hey, bearing, you okay? You need lube? Do you need lube? Do you need some grease? Do you need some grease? Do you need some grease? That's what it's doing 24/7. Really, what we've changed in this new release is we have integrated the convenience, safety, and precision. So when that OnTrak or that sensor says, hey, bearing, do you need some grease? Do you need some grease? Yeah, well, you do? Well, this is exciting, right? It is ready to go. Okay, cool. I'm going to give it some grease, and grease will get dispensed in the right quantity for that specific bearing using the right grease, contaminant free, into that bearing. You did not have to actually physically go to attend that bearing. Now, also in May, when we released the OnTrak, we also released our new UE Insights cloud-based dashboard and alerting platform. This platform is designed specifically for this use case and also to be able to do remote lubrication. So it is optional because, as I mentioned, we can send this data to other systems as well. You have invested in automation. You have a fleet of Allen Bradley PLCs and you're using Factory Talk. By all means, send data to there as well. You can send it to UE Insights. You can send it to OSI Pi, IP21, your CMMS system. You can start to see how open we made this system. So when we talk about some of the main features, the first one is communication. So really what's happening in IoT is how are we getting information out to the right people at the right time on any connected device. So Ethernet has been around for a long time. We've been doing that in the condition monitoring space where you run a blue hose or an Ethernet connection into the unit is trying to measure. You have to work with IT. Sometimes it goes smoothly. Most often there's, and rightfully so, there's some surveys, some questions you need to go through, right? So we have Wi-Fi too. If your plant has a reliable Wi-Fi signal, and often I say that because you might think I have Wi-Fi in my office, so I have it in the plant. You don't, right? It needs to be a good, reliable signal, so sometimes repeaters are needed. But we also did cellular, and we did this by purpose, and we knew it'd have an impact. We just didn't understand the impact it would have on. So anywhere from our factory, we can provision and activate a SIM card in 270 countries across the globe. So really, you plug this OnTrak in, it connects and starts sending data. That is it. And because it's using a cellular connection, it's not connected to your plant network in any way, the IT and security questions become a lot less. So it is a modular system. So each system, each OnTrak system is capable of monitoring 16 bearings with 16 single point lubrication devices. So 16 sensors and 16 single point lubrication devices. So each bearing can have a sensor and a lubrication device, but it doesn't mean you have to have a lubrication device for every bearing. You can just have the sensor. You know what? I'm still going to use a technician, an oiler, a lube tech, reliability engineer to go out and lubricate it. You can still monitor it. It's still going to tell you exactly when lubrication is required and precisely how much. You're just going to go out there with a grease gun and do it. Now, when it comes to the mobile view aspect of it, this is also where we put a lot of effort into. And when we took a holistic look at how our customers are using our products and what's happening in the industry, first of all, no one likes bulky software to install. So we said, first thing we have to do is make sure there is zero, and I mean zero software to install on your PC, on any enterprise IT computer, anywhere when you're using UE Insights. The other challenge that we saw is a lot of us are using company cell phones, right? And sometimes companies lock those down. You need to get permissions to download apps and things like that. But also selfishly on our end too, it's very difficult to maintain these apps and get permission from Google and Apple and things like that. So what we decided to do was make everything web-based, which allows us and allows you to access this information on any mobile connected device as long as you have an internet browser. So Safari on your Apple products, Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer, if you're still using that, you can access this information. So you're traveling, you forgot your phone, you want to use your spouse's phone, your kid's phone, whatever it is, you can still access this information. And we've seen this really expand from traditionally when we had this in mind, we were thinking obviously laptops, PCs, cell phones, tablets, but now we've seen smart TVs because they have web browsers built in, things like Kindles. If anyone's heard of RealWear, augmented reality headsets, makes it completely hands-free. It has a web browser built into it, so you can access this information. So how does it all come together? So we have our bearings. In this case, we're showing 4 bearings. We install our ULTRA-TRAK 750 sensors, and they get hardwired back into the OnTrak unit. So right there, I'm going to pause right there. They get hardwired back. The reason we do that is these sensors are maintenance-free, and the OnTrak provides all the power to these sensors. You don't have to worry about individually powering these. You don't have to worry about batteries to replacement. In fact, I'm going to cover this in more detail, but they are maintenance-free. There's no battery to replace. There's no sensitivity adjusting on the sensor itself. We can go up to 100 feet, and that's not a hard length. We assemble cables from our factory that go 100 feet. We can go longer, but that becomes a special order at that point. So the OnTrak is collecting that data. It's collecting that friction from those bearings. And what it's going to do is either through that Ethernet Wi-Fi or cellular, it's going to send that data to UE Insights. UE Insights is really that engine. It's processing that data, and it's really giving us prescriptive insights, right? It's taking that data, and guess what? It's saying these 2 bearings require lubrication, right? That is the precise alert you would get. It's not squiggly lines. It's not these things you have to go decipher with a code book. It is going to tell you this bearing requires lubrication. As simple and prescriptive of that. So what we have now built in is either the user, or what we're going to call our Smart Lube Assist mode, it is going to send a command to add grease. Grease is required. Alert comes in. Would you like us or yourself to go out and grease this bearing, right? UE Insights is going to go through a very unique and proprietary algorithm that is going to precisely add the right grease at the right time to those bearings, right? This is really what is set to disrupt the bearing lubrication process. No longer do we have to physically go attend to that bearing to properly lubricate it. And we've also dealt with all 4 of those buckets, if you will, that cause the lubrication issues that leads to premature bearing failure. We've addressed all 4 of those, and I'll explain further. So the OnTrak. So the first thing it's a remote lubrication assistant. It is watching over your bearings 24/7. It's going to notify you when lubrication is required, and when you call upon it, if you have the Smart Lube feature, it will lubricate the bearings with precision using friction as its guide, and also using ultrasound best practices in place to make sure we don't over or under grease that bearing. We do store all the information on that bearing, so we know and there's a reason for this, and I'll explain to it. We want to know the size of the bearing, all that type of information, because no matter how good we are with ultrasound guided lubrication, there are certain scenarios that can lead to over lubrication that we want to address. So no matter what you do when you're using the Smart Lube Assistant mode, it will never exceed the maximum capacity of that bearing. Now, when it comes to going through that lubrication cycle, right? Often what we do is, or we should, best practice is to say, this is how much grease we use, this is the resulting friction, the change in that friction, my starting, my ending friction, and we start to track how long it's been in between lubrication intervals and things like that. We're really trying to optimize our lubrication program. So we designed it so the system, the OnTrak Smart Lube, would automatically document all of the key lubrication insights that you would want to calculate, to be able to alert on, to be able to trend. There is 2 modes. There's a manual and automatic greasing mode. And I've explained a little bit about the automatic, but I will go into a lot more detail on how it works. But it allows you to have complete control and oversight of your lubrication program. It is not going to do anything unless you give it permission to. It's not going to start going out there and just lubricating your bearings at random. You have to give it the oversight to do so. And we also have a manual button. A lot of people say, well, if it's going to go out there and it's going to lubricate it perfectly using your decades of experience that you've been able to program into the Smart Lube Assist, why do I still need a manual mode? Because the reality is sometimes we need to take control. And I'll give you an example. We have seen this many, many times, and many of you on this webinar may have done that, where you can nurse a bearing, I was going to say through failure, but it's still going to fail, but prolong that failure with grease. Even though you know you're over greasing it, but you're just trying to get, I need another hour, I need another day, or whatever it is. So you're going to exceed maximum capacity. You're going to risk blowing out that seal, but you want to keep that bearing going. So that's why we have that manual function. And with the times that are happening today, we want to take all this knowledge. We're documenting which bearing type it is, the size of it, how often you're greasing it, who greased it, what was the starting and ending friction, what was the time in between these lubrication cycles, and that's all getting fed into an advanced learning engine. It's not going to optimize and give you recommendations the minute you put it on, say, you should be lubricating this less frequently and doing this, and that's not how this works. We're going to learn over time, learn your habits, learn what's happening in your facility to start optimizing that lubrication program. And as I said, we can take the system and start automatically sending this information to other things, including a CMMS. So if you do lubricate and it's going to record how much grease you used, what was the starting and ending decibels, what grease type was used, all that type of information you would want, it can send that information into your CMMS ERP system to automatically document that, so you don't have to transfer information from the UE insights into your CMMS or ERP system. So as I mentioned, we really wanted this to be simple, right? We wanted it to be easy to use. So first of all, as I said, many of you are already users of ultrasound, and we really appreciate that. And it's because of you that really driven this product forward. So essentially what we're doing with friction is we're focusing on a narrow band of high frequency to measure friction, okay? And really, what is the point of an anti-friction bearing? It's right in its name, to reduce friction. The great part about it is there is always an inherent level of friction, and that's what we're trying to get with that baseline. And of course, with ultrasound, we're not just looking at lubrication issues. This is just not a proactive issue. It is very much used to detect that failure beyond, or that onset of failure beyond lubrication as well. Now, often we can get into a debate on these forums of which technology is going to detect what first, right? But what we're doing is we're measuring essentially friction versus movement, right? And it's a very good leading indicator of the lubrication needs and health of that bearing. So here's the reality. When we set out with this product, let's go fight friction. We're all friction fighters. When we're in the bearing management space, we all put on a virtual cape, if you will, and we go out and fight friction. But it's really not friction that is the enemy, it's time that is the problem, right? And what we found, and from talking with customers like you, is, it's really, if you had the ability just to manage a few bearings and really baby them, right? We would not have bearing failures, right? But you don't have the time. You don't get paid just to monitor 2, 3, 4 bearings, right? So it's really time that is the issue. And what I want to do here is give it a little experiment. And what I'm going to ask you to do is count the number of F's in the sentence below. I'm going to give you only a few seconds. Count the number of F's. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm curious, in your head, tell me how many F's you were able to find. Right? Some are going to say 3, some are getting 4. Some of you nailed it and said 6, right? What happens in our human psyche is we forget that 2-letter word that starts with an O and ends with an F, to count those, right? So if you got to 3, you didn't count the F's, right? And they're probably going back and reading this right now going, right? But we all know, most of us know what the letter F looks like on this call, right? We'll make an assumption that we all know what the letter F looks like. And I got 3 when the first time someone showed me this. I counted 3 F's, right? And I'm like, oh boy, right? But that's just the way we work, right? So anytime we have humans, it's not like we don't know what the letter F is, just like we know the best practices of lubrication, but sometimes we don't have the time or focus to spend our energy on that, right? And this is really what the OnTrak Smart Lube is here to do. It's not here to replace lubrication techs or oilers or reliability engineers. It is here to enable them to make better, faster, more accurate decisions on the health and life of their bearings. So really, time is the enemy. Time, because obviously everything takes time and we have a finite amount of time in our day, in our working period, and in the reality in our life. So many of us have resulted to do time-based lubrication, right? And there's a calculation, there are many calculators out there. They vary a little bit in terms of how they calculate it, but they often result in somewhat similar numbers, right? And when we look at these time-based lubrication calculators, what is challenging of this, and this is really what's changing with IoT, is just look at, say, N equals speed in RPM. How many of us have variable speed or variable frequency drives that are out there? And what is great, as we are getting more energy conservation and there are programs in place, we're trying to save energy, reduce the speed when we don't need it. So we're seeing speeds that can fluctuate 50 to 80% of the max speed of that motor. So as that speed changes, look at where that N is in that calculation. It is going to have an impact, right? So what we try to do is try to get the average speed, but that not be indicative of what's actually happening out there with that motor. And we look at the interval correction factors, right? And temperature is the first one, housing below 150. Well, what if it was 151, right? Would you use 1 or would you use 0.5? In fact, you'd probably use 0.9 something, right? So what happens is we do these calculations, we often do them once, we never go back and look to them. And we often think that we are covered with this, when in fact, we know that the variables used to do this calculation do not reflect the changing operational and environmental conditions. Now, let me tell you this, if that bearing is older, do you think that calculation still holds true, right? The chances are no, right? So time is also an issue when it comes to calculating when to apply and how much grease to actually apply. So when we looked at this and very holistically, right, we looked at the two methods, time-based and condition-based lubrication. And we started comparing that to the 4 modes or those 4 buckets of what leads to that 80% of premature bearing failure. So the first one is lubricant contamination. Anytime you have someone with a grease gun, yes, we can put processes in place to reduce the risk, but there is a chance that you put either contaminations in or you use unsuitable lubricant, you start mixing greases. And when we did our beta customer, he said, Blair, have you ever seen a lubrication technician wipe down a Zerk fitting, right? And I couldn't answer that question. I'm probably sure I have, and there might be a few of you on this call going, yeah, I do it every time, and that is tremendous, right? That is best practice, but there's always a chance that people are not, and you introduce those contaminants. And then there's, really we're seeing an on-shift of these automatic lubrication devices, or what I call auto lubers. Now, also, when we were doing this project, we talked to many, many users that use these. And when I ask, do you use automatic lubers and do you like them? It's a love-hate relationship. They said, Blair, I did use them. They ended up over-greasing. I threw them out. Or it was, Blair, I used them. Those darn things ran empty. I thought I was doing good. I had no idea. Now I have to do a PM to check the luber that's doing an automatic PM on my bearing, right? Where we still see them used today is for bearings that are very difficult or unsafe to access, and you resort to knowing there is risk with time-based, but it is obviously better than having any safety incidents. So what we decided to do, so even with our grease caddy, you're still walking out there with a grease gun. You know precisely when lubrication is required and how much, but there's still a risk of contamination and mixing greases. So we took the best from the single point or automatic lubers and our grease caddy and built that into one unit. So what do we do? So we're measuring that friction, right? Because friction is the outcome. Friction is the condition of that bearing. We're not using time, we're using friction. And this is recommendations of alarm settings in the ISO standard. So when we set a baseline, and we can do a whole other webinar on how we set baselines, and I'm sure there's going to be questions. Well, I have a bearing that's already been operating. It is not brand new. It has not been maintained perfectly. It has not been lubricated perfectly. How do you set a baseline? We can address that, and we'll discuss how, either if we have time in the Q&A session, or as Maureen mentioned, set up a meeting. We can actually show you live on systems that we've been able to baseline, even knowing that they're in a failure mode. So when we see an 8 decibel increase over that baseline, indicates a lack of lubrication. So it's literally saying this bearing requires lubrication. When the OnTrak gets that and sends that alert out to you, it's not going to give you just quantitative information. This bearing has increased by X amount of decibels. It's very prescriptive. This bearing requires lubrication, right? And when we see a 16 decibel increase, it means we've gone beyond that lubrication failure mode, right? Lubrication may help mask that for a little bit, but it's still a failure that lubrication is not going to solve. And what I tell people here at this stage, once you go over 16 decibels, I really don't care about the units. I don't care about the quantitative number. What I'm looking for is the rate of rise. How quickly is that friction changing? Because if it's an inter-race defect, if it is an individual ball bearing that has an issue, as it enters further into its failure mode, it's going to cause more and more friction. And then when we see it go above 32, it means it's a critical failure. It's close to failure. It doesn't mean it's going to blow up in the next minute or so, but at that point, you really start getting a plan in place to replace that bearing. Now, this is an example of the prescriptive alerts that come from the OnTrak system. The first thing it tells you is the alert description, lubrication required. In this case, this was feedback from one of our guys and our customer that implemented the system. He said, can I actually just put the grease type in there as well? Now, this is obviously before the Smart Lube feature, but I said, why not? Absolutely. So in this case, this customer said lubrication is required, Mobilux EP3 grease, right? So you know exactly what grease to use. Now imagine if you're not a technical person and you have planners or schedulers or someone that just goes and enters the work orders that doesn't really understand ultrasound or bearings. If they get this alert, they get this message, okay, lubrication is required on this bearing, create a work order. Done. I've created that work order, right? It's very prescriptive on what to do with this. We also put a lot of effort into the human visual part of this. So in our UE Insights, we have a number of these visualization widgets that you can create your own dashboards. This is an example of our gauge widget, and I really like this because what it allows you to do is look at the lubrication and health insights of not just one, but tens, hundreds, and thousands of bearings. Essentially, what you look at this is you want all of the arrows on these gauge to be in that green zone. That's from baseline plus 8 decibels. It does change a bit with varying speed drives, and we'll get into that. So if you look at this and you see that arrow in the green zone, that means it's a healthy bearing. So what we're doing is we're taking that friction, that ultrasound level, and we're taking typically a 10-minute moving average. We do recommend that, but there are scenarios where you can change that that moving average to give you a good representation of what is happening in that bearing. So let's say you walked in and you looked at this big screen TV and you're monitoring 100 of your most critical bearings, and you saw that in the arrow of this gauge in that blue zone. It indicates a lack of lubrication. You can see how easy it would be to scroll through hundreds, thousands of these bearings and see which one needs lubrication. But let's take it a step further. This is not historical data. This is real-time data coming from that bearing. So if you were to take your cell phone and you can completely see these type of widgets on a cell phone, on a tablet, and you were to walk up to that bearing, holding your cell phone, using a grease gun, you start to apply the grease to that bearing. You, in real time, would start to see that arrow as that grease enters that bearing, reducing the friction, start to fall back down to baseline. Once that arrow goes in the green line, you've hit that baseline, you have sufficiently lubricated that bearing using your cell phone, using a tablet, right? This is really what the OnTrak was designed to do. Now, of course, with the Smart Lube feature, you don't have to get off your butt anymore. You can literally hit a button and it will start dispensing lubrication to bring that down to baseline. Now, if that arrow was in the yellow zone, again, we're saying lubrication might help mask the problem, but you're in a failure mode beyond lubrication. And again, what you're concerned about is how quickly that is moving to the right. So as I said, as the operator, the lubrication tech, the oiler, whatever you want to call them, adds grease, he or she will notice a gradual drop in that decibels. Once that level falls back to the baseline, that bearing is sufficiently lubricated. So this is one of our early customers that put in the system, and I was really happy with this picture, right? Because it allows me to talk about two things. So what this user is doing is using his cell phone to look at that real-time friction. In his left hand, he has a grease gun, right? This is a recent picture, so he has his mask on and everything else. He's following safety procedures, right? This really is what the OnTrak system was initially designed to do, right? And it's because customers like you that challenged us, great, you've automated the fact that I can now monitor my bearings from anywhere, anytime, monitor that friction and know precisely when lubrication is required. But I still have to go out there with that grease gun on my left-hand side. In this case, you can actually see that is a rotating belt. There's guards in place and things like that, but it's still a relatively unsafe condition. So our next step is, how do we automate that grease gun? So the precision that person has in their hand, the decisions they're making as grease is entering that bearing, when to stop, when to apply more, how do we automate that? And that's what the Smart Lube is about. So we've been doing this for decades of ultrasound assisted or ultrasound guided lubrication, and the results have been tremendous, right? In many cases, we've seen a grease consumption reduced by at least 30%. We have seen numbers that are staggering in terms of 300%. It really depends on how much you have been over greasing your bearings. So often what we see when it comes to that affordability part, which I will talk about, things like reducing manpower, reducing the grease consumption can have a very quick payback. We haven't even discussed about implementing or putting the results of the downtime savings into that calculation as well. So we wanted to take that grease gun out of that person's hand. This is the evolution, right? The person sitting at their nice fancy desk, through a tablet, through a cell phone, can actually lubricate anywhere, anytime, with real-time friction as your guide. You do not have to physically go out and attend to that bearing, right? And what that person is going to look at is very specific, thought out screens to lubricate your bearings, right? So the first thing we've had to address is, I have no idea if there's grease left in that single point lubricator, right? I don't want to do on a PM and a PM and a PM to do a PM, right? So of course, every action that single point lubricator is going to take is controlled by the OnTrak. Whether it's in manual or assisted mode, we know precisely the level that is in that. And of course, you can set alarm limits to say, reorder at this point, don't lubricate because you have no grease left, those type of things. And we also calculate how much grease is used per the lubrication cycle, when it started, what mode it's in, the starting, ending decibels, all those type of things you would expect, right? We can also go back and you can add a widget to look at, well, I'm lubricating this. Well, I wonder what I used last time. Well, last time I used, 5 cc's of grease, and I was able to get the friction down to this level. So all that information is available to you at your fingertips, on your cell phone, on your tablet, while you're lubricating. So as we did this study, we went out there and we started to look at how much is it currently taking you to lubricate, to use ultrasound guided lubrication, or if you're not using that, to do your manual routes. By not having to leave to physically attend to that bearing, what type of savings would you have, right? In one case, the customer is able to save up to 95% of those manual lubrication tax related to optimal bearing lubrication, right? And we're not saying don't go and hire lube techs, don't replace them. They have a specific purpose and skill set. Utilize that, other than putting one foot in front of the other, right? And this was a quote by a good customer of ours, Mark Ellis, and I think this quote really sums up the value, right? Is the advantage to be able to optimally lubricate those bearings without to physically attend to that bearing. Now, I think Mark also has some other advantages because he's in Canada here, so it gets awfully cold and things like that. But obviously, there is a tremendous advantage you can have with not having to physically attend to that bearing. So what have our customers seen that have implemented this to date? So as you mentioned, typically a 30% decrease in grease consumption, but that number can vary. I would say that is on the lowest part. That 95% decrease in time required for optimal bearing lubrication. And when we start to implement this, you're not going to see the benefits right away because, again, this is a challenge we've all had in reliability, is how do you quantify something that hasn't failed, right? But what you'll see over time is that reduction or decrease in premature bearing failure. Those first 2 points have tremendous payback, but when you start looking at the true cost of downtime, or what's referred to as TCD, the true cost, it is estimated that the minimum is $60,000 per hour. not just looking at the downtime, lost production, but people standing around and all the other impacts that it can have, right? This can often mean this system pays back in less than a year. So for the first time, what we've been able to do with this technology is know precisely when lubrication is required, know exactly how much lubrication is required, lubricate using the correct grease every time, and eliminate the potential for foreign material to be introduced while lubricating. And if you remember, that goes back to those four buckets, if you will, that lead to that 80% of premature bearing failure. So let me ask you this, how much time could you save if you had a bearing lubrication assistant telling you when to lubricate and is ready to lubricate anytime from anywhere, right? It constantly works overtime. It's waiting there, middle of the night, in the morning, it's there. So one thing I wanted to cover very quickly was the openness of this system. So we built in industry protocols as well as REST APIs to be able to send any data that's in the system to any other system. Now, if you do want to use a Smart Lube remote lubrication feature, you do have to use UE Insights because that's where all the logic and user interface is built into. So let's talk about affordability, right? We have to have that tipping point in this conversation. So the first thing we tried to do was reduce the amount of cables and installation time to be able to install this system, right? And then when it comes to the sensor, a lot of the affordability comes with the sensor. This sensor is really what's driving that friction. Without the friction, it is simply just an automatic lubrication device, right? So first of all, it's made for industrial application. It's completely stainless steel. It's IP67 rated, indoor, outdoor, harsh environment, and it's maintenance free. There is 0 terminals on this sensor itself. There's no battery to replace. It is designed, and we have put them out there for years and years and years and years in some of the harshest environments that are out there. So how does it get mounted? It's a stud mounting. If any of you have used our RAS kits for your ultra probes, it is the same process of mounting that stud with a 2-part epoxy. That 10 to 15 minutes it takes for that epoxy to dry, chances are you're going to have the OnTrak up and running and sending data. Now, temperature is an issue for some of you in some applications, right? Which, if it is an issue, that means it's already a pain in the butt or safety issues going to lubricate that bearing, right? So if it becomes a hot or that bearing is physically running hot, we have these thermal isolation devices, and I can give you all the temperature ratings and things like that. If you reach out to me, we have these thermal isolation devices, so we haven't hit a bearing yet that we couldn't monitor, because if the bearing gets to, like, we have these mounted on steam traps and things like that. So if the bearing is that hot, then your bearing's failing anyways, right? So temperature is not usually a challenge for us. I just want to be able to show you quickly what an installed sensor looks like so you can get an idea. As you can see, it's completely stainless steel. It's stud mounted. The sensor then screws onto the stud. But the other part this picture allows me to show you, and again, it's not the most best marketing picture you're ever going to see on this installation, but it's really a true life installation. As you can see, the cable is actually tied to that lubrication line. It's cable tied to it. And what can happen is when you're dealing with ultrasound, you might think, any noise around that equipment might be a problem. How do I know I'm specifically listening to that bearing, if you will? So the first thing is, what's great about ultrasound is it's very directional. We're not looking at movement, we're looking at friction, which is very, very directional. And what we've also done is we've shielded the sensor and the cable itself all the way back to the OnTrak unit. So if this cable goes across to other mechanical equipment or other high voltage equipment, we are not going to pick up any noise from any other equipment. When properly installed, it is listening to just that bearing. Now, when it comes to the single point lubricator, it is designed to have 2 different sizes, right? And cost is not what dictates the size. It's really how frequently you want or you're going to have to lubricate that bearing. Because what you don't want, if you have a small electric motor that only is going to get greased once every 6 months, but of course you're going to do it based on friction, not time, that grease may last a long, long time. We'd probably recommend to go to a 125 cc, so you do deplenish that cartridge. It is a precision lubrication. It's a very specific pump that delivers a fixed amount of grease every time you hit that button. So here's an interesting thing. It is battery powered. And the reason we did that is we didn't want any power issues coming from the OnTrak unit itself. So it comes with a battery pack, and that battery pack is replaced every time you replace that grease cartridge. The cost is peanuts to replace that, and it's guaranteed to last as long as that grease cartridge, right? If you think about it, that single point lubricator, the majority of its life, 99.9% of its life, is sitting there in a passive state going, do I need to lube? Do I need to lube? Do I need to lube? OnTrak, you got a signal for me, right? When it's called to action, that's really when it starts using that battery to actually turn the motor and things like that. And of course, it's contaminant free, right? It's really designed to make sure there's no ingress of any other foreign material into that unit. So it's self-contained, standalone. It produces over 200 PSI. So a lot of questions we get is, can you remotely mount these? The pictures that I've shown has been shown it directly on the bearing. And yes, you can push through up to 20 feet of remote lubrication lines. Okay, so I'll say it again, you can push through up to 20 feet per one unit. Easily replaceable single-use cartridges. So this allows you just to simply get a new cartridge, you screw in the new one, throw out the old one, and you are off to the races. We can supply these single point lubricators with your specific grease. Okay, we have a list of, gosh, I want to say it's almost at the thousands at this point of grease that can get applied into each of these devices. And it's suitable for outdoor use at -40 to 60 degrees C. Right, I guess -40 is the same when you get down that low in F or C, and it's designed obviously to be weatherproof. Now, if you do have harsher environments than these temperature ratings, there is other single point lubricators that we can connect to as well. So the first thing we didn't want you to have to do is think about, oh gosh, how do I design a system right now? I'm walking around with the grease gun, like, do I remote mount it, all that kind of stuff. We will work with you to be able to design what the correct system is. Maybe not all bearings require a single point lubricator, right? Where to mount these and all these things. There is some installation, but we're going to be there beside you to say this is the best practice to mount these sensors on this type of motor and the lubricator and things like that. And we're also there to help set those baselines. As I said, very few of us get the opportunity to baseline a brand new bearing to get that birth certificate. So we'll work with you to make sure we set the appropriate baselines for the condition and health of that bearing, and obviously monitor it and then lubricate it. So I want to talk a little bit about UE Insights. So first of all, what it allows us to do is monitor all of our OnTrak units, right? So we can change updates, we can change sensor names, invite users to UE Insights, all from the comfort of our desk. And of course, all data that comes in here is timestamped, right? So if we want to export it to a CSV or link it to process data, then everything has an exact timestamp with it. And that's what I was saying. It's really designed through these visualization widgets. And what we came to learn was that there's not a single organization or a single person that wants to look at data the same way. So we didn't want to dictate on you how we think you should see this data. So we will give you a template, a starting point. So the minute you power that OnTrak up, you have real insights coming to you, but you have complete control to change that dashboard and create as many dashboards as you want using gauge widgets that have shown you real-time trends, real-time values, histograms, charts, things like that to create a dashboard specifically how you want to see that data. Now, security is a big part, because we don't want anybody accidentally lubricating a bearing, which, trust me, you will get warned. Are you sure you would like to lubricate this bearing? You have to have the right credentials. So what we've been able to do is build a system that allows you to build a hierarchy that matches your facility or enterprise. So you can assign people to different areas, different security credentials. So when they log in, they can only see the information that they are designed to see and only have the access. So yes, we have what I call the fiddler credentials, right? And we all have them. Some of you might be those guys that just like to push buttons, right? So we have that ability. Guess what? You're read only. You can't do anything else. You can't lubricate. You can just sit there and look at the data. Then we have read write, and then we have an admin access as well. So as I mentioned, we have these specific widgets now designed specifically for lubrication, and you can create any visual how you want to see this data while you're lubricating. So let's go a little bit into these modes. So as I mentioned, we have two modes. We have Smart Lube Manual and Smart Lube Assist, right? So Smart Lube Manual, what it's going to do is you got to enter additional security measures, because what we didn't want, if you had left your screen open, we didn't want someone to go lubricate these bearings without you knowing, right? It's going to automatically start that lubrication cycle, and it's going to place the OnTrak into 1 second update. And I'll explain to you what that is. So if you think about it, how frequently would you want data, that friction data, right? And typically, if you're using our Ultra probes or grease caddy, you might capture that data once a month. So what we did is we have a default setting of 1 minute in the OnTrak, which means it's going to ask that bearing, what is your friction? Do you need any lubrication? Are you starting to fail every minute? But as we're lubricating, that 1 minute can seem like an eternity. So we built in a feature, what we call fast sample or 1 second update, that will turn the update rate from every minute to every second. And I would encourage you to book an online demo where we can show you with this live data with systems all over the world of what that looks like. No matter where you are in the world, on any device, you can measure that friction like you're standing right next to it. So what it's going to do is a precise amount of grease is going to dispense from that lubrication device. Of course, you as the human, you're going to watch what that change in friction happened. Did it go down? Did it go up? Did it stay the same? You can make that decision using ultrasound guided best practice if you want to dispense more grease. And then when you are satisfied with that, you can end that lubrication cycle, and it's going to automatically calculate the amount of grease that was used, the amount of time taken, the starting and ending decibels, and all that kind of information. But that still requires you hitting that manual button. Now, let's just say you had to put in 6 cc's of grease. You had to wait time in between. That could take you half an hour just to monitor one bearing. So we had to get into automation. But what we had to do is we had to use best practices in place to make sure we don't overgrease it. So we had 3 checkpoints in place. First thing we had to do is make sure the bearing does require grease. We have to make sure that the accumulation of the amount of grease does not exceed the maximum bearing capacity. At no point in time will Smart Lube Assist exceed the maximum bearing capacity, regardless of how the deviation or the delta in that friction. And if anyone has ever done this before, you'll notice that sometimes just because there's a defect in that bearing or some other reasons, you can never get that friction or decibel level back to that baseline. And what happens is you start to get it close, you apply more grease, and then that friction starts to go up, right? If you were to keep on going, you would over lubricate it. So the first time it sees, yes, I'm trying to get it to baseline, I'm trying to get to baseline, whoop, it popped up, boom. Hey, user, something went wrong. I wasn't able to get to baseline. I got it pretty darn close, but the decibel started going up and I didn't want to over lubricate it. And you'll get that message, but not quite verbatim like that, but you can understand the point I'm trying to make. So we designed this Smart Lube Assist. It's really automating that manual process. So the same thing, you're going to enter additional security details. It's going to start that lubrication cycle. It's going to put in that 1 second update. It's going to dispense lubrication. And this is really where that unique algorithm comes in. It's starting to use ultrasound guided best practices to monitor that friction or that resulting change, right? Did I go down? Yes. Am I at baseline? No. Did I over meet the max bearing capacity? No. Those type of things. And it's going to go through that process as many times as it takes until it gets it close to that baseline, within a few percent of that baseline, or it goes out because of any one of those 3 reasons. And it will send you a message. And so this is really what we had envisioned when you're starting to think about a day in the life of you using Smart Lube Assist mode. So first of all, Smart Lube Assist, and we'll get into this, I'm sure this is going to come up in the Q&A, is why can't it do it fully automatically? We still want human intervention because there is a lot of variables, especially with variable speed drives and things like that. What if we're in the lubrication cycle and that speed increases or that machine shuts off, right? And things like that. So we want to give you the ability to make sure you can put that asset in steady state and things like that. So you're going to receive a notification that a bearing requires lubrication from an email, from a text message. You go, huh. Okay, I'm going to log into my UE Insights on my phone, my tablet. I'm going to hit that Smart Lube Assist. Go grab a coffee, right? Do other important things. I'm sure that's not the only thing you have in your day. It's going to do the lubrication for you. Now, you can sit there and have it on a screen separately and see how many cycles it's doing, see what it's doing, but you don't have to touch a thing. It is going to send you a confirmation of successful lubrication or the reasons why it did not get to baseline, and that's it. You can go finish your coffee. Right? So you can start to imagine the ease of use of this system. So for the first time, a solution out there that is designed to address these 4 conditions. Know precisely when lubrication is required, know exactly how much lubrication is required, lubricate using the correct grease every time, and eliminate the potential for foreign material to be introduced while lubricating. So I did want to talk to you quickly about, well, okay, that's great. How do I try one of these systems out? I just want to make you aware that we do have subscriptions and we do have a purchase price. Not everyone's a fan of either, right? So it's not like it's only subscription. If you have capital or you're planning for capital for next year, you can absolutely buy this system out. Obviously, there is some reoccurring costs with the cloud, cellular service, and replacement grease cartridges. So there is, but very, very, very minimal. And we've also put together a pilot kit, and I would encourage you, if you have interest in this, to start. And I say it's up to 16 sensors. You can start with 2 sensors. You can start with 4 sensors and 4 single point lubrication devices. You can do all 16. We've had one customer start with 13 full units, right? It's everything in between. But what we're going to do is make sure that you have a package that's ready to go with our support there for you to make sure that we have mutual success in this. And of course, money does matter. With these pilot kits, we have a discount in place to get you started today, right? Discount's not going to last forever, obviously, but we do want to get people using this, give us feedback, and start seeing how the savings that you can have with this type of system. So what we're saying is become a bearing lubrication hero. Put the life of your bearing at the tip of your fingers. What I invite you to do is, I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of questions. I cannot see the questions come up. Maureen has to feed them to me. Even before this webinar, we had questions come in. Can you please address this? Obviously, with an hour, I cannot address every single question. And there's often questions where I need to get some support in from UE Systems on our experts on bearing, on lubrication to support this. So what we've done is, if you want a demo, if you go to that link, and hopefully Maureen will post it in the chat, go to this and you'll see our calendars. Book whatever time fits good for you. We don't have to go back and forth. Does this work for you? Does this work for you? Just go ahead and book it. It'll get into our calendars. We'll show up ready to show you a live demo, not PowerPoint. We might have some PowerPoints to assist some points, but we can dive into a live demo. And we've also created a specific page with information on the Smart Lube, uesystems.com/smartlube, and you will get a lot of important information on there. So what I'll do is, I have 3 minutes left by my calendar, or my time. Is there any questions out there, Maureen, that you think would be good for the entire audience to hear?
Yeah, so I'm trying to post this, the link. I'm gonna just post it actually in the questions. I don't know why it's not letting me copy and paste. So I think we might have to send the link out for that calendar thing separately. And also, if you just want me to send it specifically to you, just shoot me a note. For some reason, the copy paste is not working. I don't know if it's something with going back and forth on screens, but I think the one question you could kind of answer that would kind of wrap up a lot of the things people were kind of asking about, a lot of questions kind of coming in all sort of around the idea of confidence. How do we have confidence that what if there's no flow and all of a sudden the lubrication is coming out? What if the lubricant gets contaminated? How do we know that the alarms are going to work? All these kinds of like, we don't trust it. Maybe you can kind of wrap this up in a little bow about how that confidence has been built in at every step along the way.
Yeah, so there's confidence issues, I think, at every step of the way. So even just moving from time-based to condition-based, right? So the first thing we do is we have built in the time-based recommendations from those calculators. So you can start comparing, well, in theory, the theoretical value, I should be lubricating this every 63 days, and I'm making that number up, right? So you can set an alarm just to go and check your friction, right? Am I actually increasing? And things like that. You could actually keep this on time-based while monitoring that friction, and then sort of wean yourself off, right? To prove to yourself that you are already, chances are you're over lubricating. Now, let's come to the issues that we have. So say you start to lubricate and someone disconnected your lubrication line, right? So you start to lubricate, hey, I didn't see a change in friction. Hey, I didn't change the friction because lubrication is just falling on the floor, right? It's going to send an alarm saying I've lubricated, and it's configurable because it depends on the size of the bearing. Everything comes back to that calculation to say, I've lubricated this time, something is up, you should go have a look at that, right? And certain alerts like excessive back pressure and things like that are all things that we can take into account to give us more confidence that system is doing. And it typically doesn't take much grease to have an impact on that friction. So we can tell right away when we hit that button. Obviously, the OnTrak has a handshake between all these devices. So if we send a command, the OnTrak is going to acknowledge, okay, Blair, I understand you want to grease. This was the time, date, and this is when I greased. So it's not going to take much to realize that when I've hit that, I didn't see a resulting change at any level in friction. There must be something going on. And again, we can talk about this in more detail. I encourage you to go and book a demo. We can talk about it in more detail.
And I did figure out, I had to copy it into a notepad, but I got the link is in the chat. I also posted it as an answer to someone's question, but I posted it to everybody. So if you're looking for that link and you want to quickly take care of that now, before we close out of here, it's there. But of course, we'll follow up and we'll make that link available after the fact as well. And as I said at the beginning, the questions we didn't get to, which Blair, I was trying to answer people's questions as we were going throughout. So
yeah,
I knew we were going to be short on time,
yeah.
but we'll be sure we get everything answered. And most likely we'll be doing some more of these as well as we learn more what people are asking questions about, so we can be sure we're covering it and getting those answers throughout the presentation. So just keep an eye on our LinkedIn, keep an eye on your inboxes, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to come from us on this topic, as we're obviously very excited about it. So I'm just I took the screen back, Blair. I'm just gonna kind of close things out here for us. Before we let everybody head out, though I'm sure some are already headed that way. But so just a little bit, just to kind of pivot a little on just a reminder that our online training courses, we've got a special running through the end of this week for $100 off. So if that's of interest, check that out. I'm going to put our contact page up here. So for sure, I've already told a lot of people to email me with questions or requests that you've got for information from today. So, leave that up there so you know how to get in touch with us. And yeah, I hope everybody's as excited as we are. Definitely follow up with us, book that personal intro so you can ask your questions, directly to Blair and the team. And we hope everybody has a great rest of the day, and we'll catch you guys later.
Thank you, everybody.